I've got news for Democrats and the media. Ending wars is not easy. Democrats have no problem starting wars, but ending wars, especially wars you didn't start, is not so easy. It can be messy, and sometimes, guess what, feelings can get hurt. But you know what happens 100% of the time? The weaker party always loses. And right now, Ukraine is the weaker party. And this myth that Ukraine is somehow going to win the war against Russia is and always has been just that, a myth that's cost almost 1 million lives. And when President Zelensky showed up at the White House, he was expecting to be treated just like every foreign leader has treated him since Russia invaded in 2022, just like he's Winston Churchill. Red carpets, hugs, standing ovations, and none of that stuff that he doesn't want to hear, like ending the war in Ukraine. As a result, we have never seen what played out on Friday in the Oval Office, never before in U.S. history. Never, not in the Oval Office, not in front of the president, the vice president, the Secretary of State, the media, America, and the rest of the world. A president has never been shown so little respect by a foreign leader who clearly still thought he was sitting opposite Joe Biden. I have never seen a world leader misread a situation so badly. He misread that room. He misread the mood. He misread how the majority of this country feels today about the war in Ukraine.
Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
Yes. What about
if you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
I don't know about you, but that's precisely what I voted for on November the 5th. And over the weekend, Democrats blamed what happened in the Oval Office Friday on Donald Trump. No surprise there, but they didn't mention that Harvard-Harris poll out late last week that found that 72% of the American people want to see the war in Ukraine come to an end. And forget about the fact that this war was started and then funded for the better part of 3 years by a president with dementia, who made it very clear just a month before Russia invaded that a minor incursion into Ukraine would be tolerated.
I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera.
Democrats and the media never seem to mention that Joe Biden's minor incursion has led to almost 1 million deaths, or that Joe Biden's minor incursion has cost taxpayers almost $300 billion. The media also never mentioned that this was never once Donald Trump's war. They also never mentioned that Joe and Kamala clearly didn't have any plan to end this debacle of a war. So President Zelensky struts into the White House like it's 2 years ago and did more damage to his country in a matter of minutes than I've ever seen a politician do. And the face of the Ukrainian ambassador was everything you needed to see. Right there, she put her head in her hands. If you needed to know what she thought about the situation, that was it right there in that moment. How much damage President Zelensky had done. And that's because the American people have had enough. They've had enough of this war. They've had enough of the killing. And they've had enough of President Zelensky.
Holy Toledo, look at this trend line here. U.S. support for Ukraine is too much. Back when the war began, back in February of 2022, it was just 7%. Up like a rocket ship. My goodness. What a difference from just 3 years ago. I can remember, John, all those backyards in the United States with those Ukrainian flags. Far fewer of them today. Confident Zelensky will do the right thing when it comes to world affairs. Back in 2022, it was the clear majority, 72% through the floor. By 2024.
And now it's 72% of Americans that want this war over. The truth is that it always falls on Republicans to end wars, because all Democrats do is start them. World War I, a Democrat got America involved. World War II, a Democrat got America involved. The Korean War, a Democrat got America involved. Vietnam, a Democrat got America involved. And Ukraine, a Democrat got America involved again. And that Democrat, Joe Biden, never had a plan to end the war because Joe Biden has dementia, and ending a war is a whole lot to take on if your brain doesn't work properly. Joe Biden. And what no one seemed to notice was that as soon as President Zelensky finished interrupting Donald Trump in the Oval Office, as soon as President Zelensky finished arguing with the American president, his face told you everything you needed to know, because he knew in that moment, once he stopped talking, that it was over. I'm going to show you video right now, and I want you to look at his face. I want you to focus on President Zelensky's face and look at his eyes.
Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt.
This is President Zelensky right after the back and forth between he and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Now, you can hear Donald Trump, but it's not important what he's saying. I want you to focus solely on his face and his eyes. He's not there. He's not in that room. He is not present in that moment. He's not even listening to what Donald Trump is saying. He's replaying what just happened over and over in his head. His eyes are everywhere but focused on the president, on the vice president, on the Secretary of State. He looks all over the room. He looks lost. For a moment, you almost feel bad for him. But then you remember that because of Democrats in the Oval Office, the American people have funded this war for more than 3 years, and our hearts break for the Ukrainian people. But my heart does not break for this man. It does not break for President Zelensky, and that lasted for 2.5 minutes before he said another word. Yet, in unison, after that, over the last several days, through some kind of European Union globalist sorcery, leaders around the world, in unison, all tweeted their support for Ukraine, and they all said the same thing. The Prime Minister of Australia, we stand with Ukraine. Belgium, we stand behind Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in their historic fight to defend freedom. Canada, we will continue to stand with Ukraine. Denmark proudly stands with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Germany, Ukraine is not alone. Spain stands with you. Sweden tweeting, Slava Ukraine. But you know what? Not a single one of them mentioned once. No one ever mentioned ending the war. No one ever mentioned peace. Tweets from 50 prime ministers, presidents, and world leaders. And in calendar year 4 of this war, no one talked about peace, to the point where the Prime Minister of Great Britain today, this was not 3 years ago, this was today, said that he is willing to send troops into Ukraine and send British fighter jets over Ukrainian airspace.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead, and to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace.
Notice that his entire plan that he just laid out is contingent upon what he calls strong U.S. backing. Of course, we have to back their little plan for their little plan to work, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because Donald Trump has been crystal clear since the campaign trail, from day one, that his goal is to end this war and stop the killing. So Britain wants to escalate the war. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't make any sense to me. You might also find it interesting that CNN is now making it clear to the very few people who still watch that network, if you want to call it that Europe would have no problem going it alone financially if they had to.
I'll close with this, a little ray of light in all this. If the United States were to simply stop supporting Ukraine, let's not forget, collectively, the European economy is 5 times the size of Russia. Their defense spending is 3 times the size of Russia. They can provide an awful lot of assistance. They can make up for a U.S. that walks away. Boy, do I hope we don't get to that point. That's when the transatlantic bridge breaks.
Can you explain why we hope it doesn't get to that point? And boy, oh boy, that information would have been helpful like 3 years ago. Isn't that wonderful? While American taxpayers have spent over $200 billion. To that, gentlemen, it turns out that Europe can fund the war without the U.S. indefinitely. Does that make any sense? Of course not. No one ever talked about the next step of the war in Ukraine because there was no next step. Because the next step, whether it was a secret or not, probably involved U.S. soldiers on the ground.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying.
So where are we right now? Is President Zelensky exhausted from 3 years of war in his country? Absolutely. Did the largest country in Europe attack him unprovoked? Absolutely. Is President Zelensky worn out? I'm sure he is. And I get the power divide that existed in that room, in the Oval Office on Friday. The most powerful man on the planet sitting next to the president of a country that most Americans still cannot find on a map. The most powerful man in the world who has been crystal clear about not starting a world war with the largest nuclear power on earth over the Donbass region in Ukraine. Donald Trump has been very clear about that. All President Zelensky had to do Friday was walk into the Oval Office and be gracious and be, dare I say, magnanimous in front of the cameras. You can say whatever you want when those cameras are not in that room. But in front of the cameras, President Zelensky, it is gracious and thankful. But he couldn't do that because President Zelensky doesn't like Donald Trump and he doesn't like J.D. Vance, and he didn't want them to win in November. And for anybody that says the opposite of true, they are lying. We know that because in the fall, in September, weeks before the election, President Zelensky of Ukraine made it a point to travel to the most important battleground state in the country, Pennsylvania. And he went there and stood behind the governor of Pennsylvania and Senator Bob Casey, who's standing right next to him there, and a Democratic congressman. I don't see any Republicans in that room. All I see are Democrats. The governor of Pennsylvania, a sitting senator, a member of Congress, all Democrats, in what was a very clearly designed move by President Zelensky to tip the scales in Ukraine's direction once again, a month before the election. Because if Kamala won the election, the death and destruction in Ukraine would continue. There's no doubt about that. And the war would never stop. Maybe Kamala would have sent U.S. troops into Ukraine. We don't know. We'll never know. But Zelensky told the Associated Press today that a deal to end the war is still, quote, very, very far away. Donald Trump saw that this afternoon and posted this on Truth Social, saying, quote, "This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with this for much longer. This is what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace." That coming from Donald Trump. The truth in the end is that the Biden White House let this war happen and gave this man over $200 billion. And Donald Trump is not going to give this man, the same man who can play the piano without his hands, another dollar. What is he using? He's not using his hands there. So what happens now? Well, first of all, Donald Trump didn't ruin anything on Friday. Donald Trump put America first. A lot of people voted for what they saw play out Friday. Somebody was being rude, so Donald Trump kicked him out of his house. You ever had to kick somebody out of your house? Not a pleasant experience. Donald Trump did it. But President Zelensky will come back. He always comes back. President Zelensky will return on bended knee, and the United States will get a better deal for the American people, as Donald Trump tries to end a war that he did not start. Democrats never said a word, a negative word, about Ukraine or Joe Biden when Joe was still in office, because the war was still going on. Because Democrats don't end wars, they start wars. And maybe somewhere deep down, President Zelensky knows that as soon as this war ends, his time as president of Ukraine would likely end with it.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.